Welcome to another episode of Tom Talks Film. In this episode, I'm going to explore how one of Hollywood's most powerful camera unions, IATSE Local 600, falls short in protecting the very cinematographers it represents. Through outdated agreements, performative DEI gestures, and a deep entanglement with legacy systems, Local 600 unintentionally reproduces many of the same inequities it was formed to fight against. However, before I continue, I have to be clear. This is not an anti-union piece. In fact, as a proud union member myself, I believe unions remain one of the most important tools workers have to protect their time, labor, and safety. But no structure, no matter how well intended, is immune to critique, especially when the gaps in protection impact the same groups who have been fighting for a seat at the table for generations. So, let's bring this into focus. Cinematographers do more than capture images. They create mood, define space, and give emotional weight to a story. But despite the artistry involved, the path to becoming a director of photography remains one of the most exclusive in Hollywood. IATSE Local 600 represents camera professionals. However, many underrepresented cinematographers find themselves shut out, especially if they don't already have industry connections or come from a legacy background. While the union offers job classification and rate protection, it remains vague on career mobility. What's missing are pathways for mentorship, advancement, and authorship. The 2018 and 2024 basic agreements between the union and studios define when and how a cinematographer gets paid, but not how they advance their career. For those already marginalized, the climb remains steep and the supports are fragile. For example, Local 600's official guide Etiquette tells workers to blend in and defer to those above. This sounds polite on the surface, but beneath it lies a damaging message. Don't speak up. For workers already battling stereotypes, this kind of enforced humility acts more like suppression, even when that silence allows bias to go unchecked. Now, in theory, Etiquette is about safety and collaboration. However, in practice, it reinforces a hierarchy where advocacy becomes a liability. And if the only acceptable workers are the ones who don't challenge the system, then the system never changes. And let's be honest, when policies prioritize etiquette over equity, it's rarely the well-connected who pay the price. Hollywood loves to frame itself as a meritocracy, but merit doesn't mean much without access, and access is often controlled by the department heads, many of whom rely on familiarity and legacy when selecting their crews. Sociologist Kia Bennett describes this as structural gatekeeping. It's not always overt discrimination. Often, it's subtle. Who gets introduced? Who gets shadowed? And who's allowed to fail without consequence? Now, there is a clause within the union contract under the title Working in a Higher Classification, which in theory should allow upward mobility. But it's rarely used to build careers, and there's no oversight or expectation that those stepping up will be promoted. So while the paperwork technically permits growth, the culture discourages it. And in the absence of systemic tracking, marginalized workers often do the job without ever getting the title. In May 2025, a class action lawsuit was filed against IATSE Local 52 in New York. The suit accused the local of nepotism and discrimination in its submission process. One technician, Ronald Bishop, had met all the eligibility requirements, including the pension threshold, but wasn't admitted for over a decade. Variety magazine reported that white connected applicants were admitted while Black and Latino applicants like Bishop were often left waiting. This isn't an isolated complaint, it's a pattern. While Local 52 is separate from Local 600, the culture of informal selection and legacy preference connects them. When entry isn't transparent, bias will fill the gaps. Unions have a responsibility to democratize access, and if they can't do that, they risk replicating the very exclusion they were built to resist. Programs like Gold Rising and Project Involved are often spotlighted in union newsletters and diversity panels. These initiatives train and support emerging talent, especially from underrepresented communities, but they don't offer what matters most: jobs. There are no contractual pipelines for connecting these programs to Local 600 hiring, and cinematographers who often complete these programs hit the same walls they started with: unlisted job boards, opaque hiring practices, and informal referrals. The result? A beautiful press release, but a disappointing reality. Equity is not a photo opportunity, it's a structure. And until programs like these are backed by enforceable hiring policies, they'll remain symbolic instead of systemic. In the age of streaming, the landscape of the camera department is shifting rapidly. Shorter shoots, hybrid crew roles, and faster turnarounds are now the norm, but union contracts have not caught up. Jennifer Bamberg reported that many newer independent productions, often staffed by women, queer folks, and people of color, fall outside the boundaries of union work, and that means labor is often undervalued or uncredited. When contracts are structured around traditional production models, new workers get left behind. The very folks pushing boundaries with digital tools are the ones least likely to be protected. And when your protection is tied to paperwork that doesn't see your labor, you're invisible by design. In 2021, the shooting on the set of Rust ignited national outrage. IATSE faced public scrutiny, and workers hoped that the tragedy would finally push safety and working conditions into the forefront. But as Rebecca Keegan and Katie Kilkenny both point out in post-Rust analysis, much of the resulting reform was focused on optics. A few locals did push for better hours and on-set standards, but meaningful contract change was limited. What's really missing from the safety conversation is this. Exclusion is also dangerous. Lack of access, career stagnation, and systemic silence create hostile conditions. Safety isn't just about physical risk, it's also about the right to be seen, heard, and respected. Unlike the Writers Guild or Directors Guild, Local 600 lacks strong arbitration clauses for credit disputes. That means if a cinematographer shoots something and someone else gets the credit, there's often no recourse. This hurts emerging cinematographers who take on gigs for small projects or fill in at the last minute. Credit is currency. Without it, their resume, portfolio, and future opportunities all take a hit. Unions that ignore credit disputes weaken their members' bargaining power. If the union's job is to protect labor, that has to include intellectual and artistic dimensions as well. The unspoken rule in many unionized sets is this: don't rock the boat, keep your head down, and be grateful. But for many marginalized workers, that silence doesn't lead to solidarity, it leads to stagnation. When mentorship, advocacy, and even peer support are seen as extras rather than expectations, the default culture wins, and that culture often looks like what's always been. Unions should reframe what solidarity means. It's not just about standing together when there's a strike. It's about showing up for each other between contracts, especially when somebody's being left behind. So where do we go from here? Well, if Local 600 wants to lead into the future, it must be willing to revise more than just its public image. And that means embedding inclusive language into its job classifications, creating mentorship pipelines backed by contract language, establishing arbitration for credit, adding grievance protections for exclusion and stagnation, and partnering DEI programs with guaranteed union access. This is not about tearing down tradition, it's about building something more durable in its place. Underrepresented cinematographers have been kept on the margins for too long, on the edge of the frame, and it's time for Local 600 to adjust its lens. Thank you for watching this episode of Tom Talks Film. My sources for this project are listed here and in the video description below. If you enjoyed this content, please like, comment, and subscribe. Until next time, get out there and make something worth fighting for.